What happens when a powerful voice refuses to back down? Jasmine Crockett, known for her fearless leadership and unwavering commitment to truth, goes head-to-head with Melania Trump in a showdown that exposes the cracks in a carefully crafted public image. In this gripping moment, Jasmine doesn't just stand up for America, she calls out the truths others want to hide. If you've ever admired her tenacity, this is the moment you won't want to miss. Stay with us as we uncover the story you won't hear anywhere else. It was a quiet evening when the live TV show began, but no one could have predicted just how quickly things would spiral into chaos. The set was sleek and professional, a place where politicians, celebrities, and public figures gathered to discuss the most pressing issues of the day. This time, the two guests couldn't have been more different. Jasmine Crockett, the fiery, no-holds-barred congresswoman from Texas, and Melania Trump, the former First Lady who had long kept a mysterious and composed image. The show's host, a calm and experienced journalist, was known for his ability to guide conversations smoothly, letting his guests speak freely without ever letting the discussion get too out of hand. That evening, the conversation was supposed to be about America's future. What did the country need moving forward? What challenges were we facing, and how could we fix them? These were questions that everyone in the room could relate to. Well, that's what they thought. As the camera rolled, Jasmine Crockett spoke first. She was known for her powerful voice, the kind that carried authority, but there was also a warmth to her tone that made people feel like they were listening to someone who genuinely cared about the country. She spoke about the challenges of inequality, the need for healthcare reform, and the future of voting rights. The topics were heavy, but she presented them in a way that felt relatable, as though she were having a conversation with friends at the dinner table. Her message was clear. We had to come together as a nation and confront our problems head-on. Melania Trump, on the other hand, was the picture of calm elegance. Her voice was soft, but her words were always measured, as though she'd been taught early on to weigh everything she said carefully. It was clear that she had spent years cultivating an image of grace and poise, traits that had made her a beloved figure among some, and a distant, almost unreachable one for others. As she spoke, her message was one of unity, much like Jasmine's. But her take was different. She spoke of the importance of family values, of the importance of supporting her husband's vision for the country, and of her focus on making life better for children. She emphasized that America's strength lay in its unity, and that we all had a role to play in that. At first, the conversation seemed like it was going to remain light. Two women, both passionate about their country but with very different approaches, discussing the future of the nation. It was civil. The host guided the discussion, switching between the two guests, letting them elaborate on their views, and keeping the tone relaxed. To the audience, it seemed like just another political debate, nothing too heated, nothing too controversial. But somewhere between Melania's calm demeanor and Jasmine's fiery rhetoric, something started to shift. It was subtle at first. There was a slight tension in the air, a barely noticeable change in Jasmine's expression when she disagreed with Melania, but she didn't say anything. Not yet, anyway. Both women seemed to be holding their ground. Jasmine's words came with a quiet intensity that suggested there was more behind her calm exterior. And Melania, though soft-spoken, was no stranger to defending herself when necessary. The host, thinking the discussion was going well, brought up a recent poll that suggested the country was divided more than ever. He asked both women for their thoughts. Jasmine responded quickly, diving into the idea that the divide wasn't just political, but emotional. People didn't trust each other anymore, she said. And if they couldn't find a way to trust their fellow citizens again, they would never be able to work together to fix the country's problems. Melania nodded, but her response was more measured. She spoke about how important it was for America to remember its values. Values that, she said, came from family and from personal responsibility. There was a hint of distance in her words, as though she was speaking not only to Jasmine but to the entire audience, reminding them that these values were part of what made America great. And then, it happened. Out of nowhere, Melania suddenly turned the conversation in a completely different direction. Before we talk about America, she said, her voice now colder, sharper, maybe you should prove where you were born. Only those truly from America should have a say about this country. The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Jasmine's face froze for a moment, and the host quickly glanced between the two women, trying to make sense of what had just been said. Melania's comment wasn't just an offhand remark, it was a direct challenge. The audience could feel the shift in the room. The tension, which had been building ever so slightly, now became undeniable. What had started as a civil conversation was now charged with an energy that no one could ignore. Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she gave a slow, deliberate smile. It was a smile that said she had expected this. She had anticipated that Melania, with her polished and carefully constructed persona, would eventually let something slip, something that would expose the cracks in her carefully curated image. But the challenge was out there now. It was as if the gloves had come off. The calm conversation about the future of America had just turned into something much more personal. And no one in the room could have predicted just how explosive the next moments would become. The audience shifted in their seats, all eyes on Jasmine Crockett, waiting to see how she would respond. Would she back down, or would she meet Melania's challenge head-on? The moment Melania Trump made her abrupt and sharp remark, the room seemed to hold its breath. It was a statement no one had seen coming, least of all Jasmine Crockett. The audience, once casually absorbed in the discussion, now felt a shift in the air, a crackling tension that no one could ignore. Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp mind and fearless demeanor, paused for a split second. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, but it was gone just as quickly. It was clear now that this wasn't going to be a polite back and forth about America's future. Melania's challenge had thrown everything off course, and the stage was set for something far more explosive. Before we talk about America, Melania's voice echoed, sharp and clear, maybe you should prove where you were born. Only people truly from America should have a say about this country. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown across the room. Jasmine's expression, though composed, was a mix of confusion and incredulity. Was Melania questioning her loyalty to the very country she served? The audience watched, stunned into silence. Melania had always been known for her polished, graceful demeanor, but this wasn't the Melania the public had come to know. This wasn't the calm and collected former First Lady who would nod quietly, seemingly above the fray. This was something different. Something calculated. Jasmine, ever quick on her feet, let the challenge sit for only a moment before responding. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice steady, but there was an edge to it now. The words were simple, but there was a weight behind them. Jasmine wasn't just asking for clarification, she was asking Melania to back up her claim. The host, sensing the rising tension, immediately interjected, attempting to steer the conversation back to familiar ground. But it was clear that Melania had just drawn a line in the sand. "I'm asking if you can prove you're truly American," she added, her tone now laced with an unspoken accusation, as if questioning Jasmine's right to even participate in this conversation. "Before we continue talking about the future of this country, I think we need to know who you really are." The words echoed in the studio, but it wasn't just Melania's challenge that hung in the air. There was something beneath it, a deeper, more personal undertone. The insinuation was clear. Jasmine, with her bold opinions and unapologetic style, couldn't possibly understand the struggles and triumphs of America the way Melania, born and raised in Slovenia, could. For a moment, Jasmine's mind raced, the weight of the question pressing on her. But then, like the seasoned politician she was, she let the silence stretch just long enough before responding, her voice cool but carrying the weight of every word. "Well, I don't think you get to decide who gets to speak for America, Melania. I was born right here, in the heart of Texas. And trust me, I understand what it means to fight for the future of this country." The audience, still tense, seemed to exhale collectively. Jasmine's words were delivered with authority, but more than that, there was an undeniable truth to them. She wasn't going to be dismissed. Not today. Not by anyone. The host, trying to regain control of the conversation, cleared his throat and awkwardly shifted the discussion back to more familiar topics. But Melania, clearly intent on keeping the conversation in the direction she had started, wasn't ready to let go of her position. "Well, we all know who's really been steering this country, don't we?" she said, her gaze briefly shifting toward the cameras, her words now more biting. "Maybe those who weren't born here shouldn't be the ones questioning what America really needs." The air in the studio felt even heavier now, and the audience, once comfortable in their seats, leaned in, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. Was this really just a spat over patriotism, or was it something more? A deeper challenge to authority? A clash of ideals? Whatever it was, it felt personal, and it was quickly becoming clear that the gloves were coming off. Jasmine, never one to back down from a fight, let the words sink in for a moment. She wasn't going to let Melania's thinly veiled jab slide unnoticed. After all, the former First Lady had opened the door, and now Jasmine was ready to walk through it. "You think because you came from another country that somehow makes you the sole authority on what makes someone truly American?" Jasmine's voice was a mixture of disbelief and frustration. "America is a country built by immigrants. You can't just decide who gets to speak based on where they were born. That's not how it works. And if you think I'm the only one with something to say about it, then you've got another thing coming." Her words were direct, but they carried the weight of something much larger than the two of them. It was as if Jasmine was speaking not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been questioned, sidelined, or diminished because of their background or identity. Melania, who had once projected an image of calm and aloofness, now looked visibly tense. Her smile had vanished, replaced by a tightening of the jaw. She wasn't accustomed to being challenged like this. Her role as the quiet, graceful First Lady had given her a shield, a place where she could remain above the fray. But now, that shield was cracking, and it was clear she wasn't used to being on the receiving end of such direct confrontation. The host tried to steer the conversation back, but it was clear that the battle lines had been drawn. Jasmine Crockett had refused to be silenced, and Melania Trump, for the first time in the entire evening, was losing control of the narrative. The tension between them wasn't just about who was American, it was about who had the right to speak, who had the right to challenge, and who had the right to define what it meant to be truly American. As the conversation simmered, the audience was left hanging on the edge of their seats, unsure of where this would lead. Would Melania back down? Would Jasmine continue to press the point? Or was something even more explosive about to unfold? The answers were still to come, but one thing was certain. What had started as a civil discussion about America was now a full-blown confrontation, and no one knew where it would end. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted. What started as a calm, almost cordial conversation had now turned into a tense standoff. The subtle clash between Jasmine Crockett and Melania Trump wasn't just about political ideology anymore, it was personal. Both women had locked eyes, each unwilling to back down, each defending their own version of what it meant to stand for America. But as the tension simmered, Jasmine wasn't about to let the moment slip away. She could feel the weight of the challenge that Melania had thrown her way. Melania's offhand remark about her birthplace was an accusation that had felt more like a trap. But Jasmine wasn't just going to respond with more words. She was going to hit back with something far more cutting. Something that no one in the room had expected. Without hesitation, she leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharpening. Her voice, though calm, carried an edge that was impossible to ignore. "You want to question where I'm from?" she began, her words slow and deliberate. "Then let's talk about something else. How about you tell us the truth about Baron Trump's real mother?" The room seemed to fall silent. The host froze, his expression a mix of surprise and confusion, while Melania's face froze too. For a moment, no one moved. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb, its weight felt by everyone in the room. It wasn't just a rhetorical jab, it was a direct, personal attack, one that took Melania's carefully controlled image and shook it to its core. The audience, sensing the shift in the conversation, leaned forward. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd as the words sank in. What was Jasmine implying? Was she suggesting something about Baron's parentage? Could it be true? No one knew what Jasmine meant by it, but everyone could tell it was a question that could unravel far more than just Melania's marriage. Melania, always poised in the face of adversity, took a sharp breath. Her eyes narrowed, and the smile she had worn throughout the evening now vanished completely. She wasn't prepared for this. Her mind raced, trying to come up with a defense, a way to dismiss this as another baseless accusation. But in that moment, she was caught off guard. Jasmine's question had done what few had managed to do before. It left her speechless. The host, his calm demeanor now replaced with nervous energy, quickly interjected, his voice shaky. "Jasmine, can you explain what you mean by that? What exactly are you suggesting? This is a very serious accusation." Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't back down or offer a coy smile. Instead, she leaned in even closer, her voice cool, but with an unmistakable sharpness. "I'm not suggesting anything, but maybe Melania should stop pretending she doesn't know what I'm talking about. The truth has a way of getting out, even when you try to hide it." The room grew even more tense. It wasn't just the words, it was the way Jasmine said them. There was a certainty in her voice, as if she knew something the rest of the world didn't. It wasn't an accusation without weight, it was a challenge to Melania's very public image as the First Lady, and more importantly, a challenge to the narrative she had been selling for years. Melania blinked, her composure starting to crack. She recovered quickly, but not before a small, involuntary shift in her expression betrayed her discomfort. "That's a fake story," she said, her voice biting. "I am Baron's real mother. Not Ivanka. Me." Her words came out with the force of a woman trying to regain control. She wasn't just defending herself, she was trying to silence the insinuation with sheer force. But the damage had already been done. Jasmine wasn't suggesting that Ivanka was Baron's mother, she had merely opened a door that Melania hadn't expected to be opened. Jasmine's eyes never left Melania's, and her voice was calm but heavy with meaning. "I never said Ivanka was his mother," she said, her words precise and unhurried. "But Melania, let's not play games. You've been covering up a lot of things, and we all know it. Don't act like you don't understand what I'm talking about." Melania's lips pressed together in a tight line, her face flushed with anger. She had always controlled her public image, always maintained the air of grace and elegance that had made her so untouchable. But now, standing in front of Jasmine Crockett, Melania was exposed in a way that she wasn't prepared for. The cracks in her perfect image were beginning to show, and there was no hiding from the truth any longer. Jasmine's words were like an accusation, but they were more than that. They were a challenge to the narrative Melania had spent years building. She had always been the quiet, supportive wife in the background, standing by her husband's side, presenting a flawless public face. But what Jasmine was doing was pulling back the curtain, asking the questions that no one had dared to ask before. The questions about what really went on behind the scenes. The questions about what Melania was hiding. As the minutes ticked by, Melania remained silent, the tension in her face growing more pronounced. She shifted slightly in her seat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. The audience, now fully engaged, waited for her response. Would she deny it more fiercely? Would she confront Jasmine head-on? Or would she remain silent and let the uncomfortable truth hang in the air? The host, now realizing that this moment had spiraled far beyond what he had expected, tried once again to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "Let's get back to the issues at hand," he said, but his voice lacked its usual calm authority. He, too, was caught off guard by the gravity of the accusation that had just been made. But Jasmine wouldn't let it go. "No," she said firmly, "we're talking about the truth. We're talking about the story that Melania has been trying to cover up for years. She can hide behind her perfect image all she wants, but the truth will eventually come out." The room was now on edge. There was no turning back. What had started as a discussion about America's future had turned into a high-stakes battle over personal truths, buried secrets, and a public persona that was no longer as untouchable as it had once seemed. Melania's silence spoke volumes. For the first time in the evening, she didn't have an answer. And that, perhaps, was the most revealing moment of all. The silence in the room was deafening. For a few heartbeats, Melania Trump simply sat there, her gaze fixed somewhere in the distance, as if she were trying to collect herself. But no words came. It was a rare moment, one that the audience, both in the studio and at home, couldn't ignore. Jasmine's sharp accusation had cut through Melania's carefully constructed persona, leaving a gap in her usual poise. Jasmine's eyes never wavered, her resolve unshaken. She had thrown down the gauntlet, but Melania's response, or lack thereof, was beginning to tell a story of its own. Melania was the epitome of calm, even in the face of public scrutiny, but this time, her silence didn't have the same effect. The cool, composed First Lady who had graced countless stages without faltering, now seemed like a woman trapped in a corner. The audience could feel the discomfort radiating from her. It wasn't just about defending her motherhood, it was about defending everything she had built. The carefully curated image of a perfect, supportive wife and mother, always above the drama, was crumbling before their eyes. Melania finally spoke, but her words came out in a rush, as though she were trying to regain control over a situation that had spiraled far beyond what she had anticipated. "That's a fake story," she said, her voice sharp, though laced with an underlying uncertainty. "I am Baron's real mother. Not Ivanka. Me." Her words were blunt, her tone firm, but there was something brittle beneath the surface. Something that didn't quite ring true. Jasmine, who had spent years in politics and public life, wasn't fooled by the veneer of confidence Melania was desperately trying to cling to. She had been on the receiving end of accusations before, but this was different. The gloves were off, and it was clear now that Melania wasn't prepared for the scrutiny that was being thrust upon her. "You're right, Melania," Jasmine said, her voice almost dripping with sarcasm. "You are Baron's real mother." But then, her expression shifted to one of near pity, as if she could already see through the cracks in Melania's defense. "But that's not what I'm talking about, is it?" Melania's jaw clenched. She was a woman who had been trained for years to present a perfect image to the world, and yet here she was, being forced to confront questions she couldn't answer. Jasmine's insinuation wasn't just about Baron's parentage, it was about everything Melania had worked so hard to keep hidden. The doubts, the questions, the whispers that had followed her throughout her time in the White House. All of it was bubbling to the surface now, and she could no longer pretend it didn't exist. "I don't know what you're implying," Melania said, her voice tight, almost defensive. She was trying to maintain her composure, but the cracks were widening with every passing second. Jasmine's eyes glinted with a mixture of frustration and triumph. She wasn't just questioning Melania's public image anymore. She was exposing the very core of her carefully constructed life. "You know exactly what I'm implying," Jasmine shot back, her voice lowering slightly, as if speaking to Melania like one would to a child who refused to acknowledge the obvious. "Stop pretending, Melania. Everyone knows there's a story there, one you've worked very hard to keep quiet." The tension in the room was so thick, it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. The audience was gripped by the unfolding drama, leaning forward, waiting for Melania to break. But Melania didn't break. She maintained her icy facade, though her grip on the situation was slipping. "I'm not hiding anything," she said, her voice quieter now, but still carrying a firm note of denial. "I'm Baron's mother, and that's all that matters." Jasmine's response was swift, her words cutting through the air. "It's not just about being Baron's mother, is it? It's about everything you've hidden. The truth is, Melania, you've been hiding behind a perfect image for years. And that's why you're so afraid of the truth coming out. Because once it does, you won't be able to control the story anymore." The audience felt the weight of Jasmine's words. They hung in the air, charged with the intensity of a truth that was difficult to ignore. Melania had built her image as the calm, elegant first lady who stayed out of the political fray. But that image had always been just that, an image. A carefully crafted narrative that painted her as the perfect, supportive wife, untouched by the scandals and controversies that surrounded her husband. But Jasmine wasn't going to let that narrative stand unchallenged. "You can't just erase the past, Melania," she continued, her voice rising. "And you can't keep pretending that everything's fine. The cracks are showing. People are starting to see through the facade. And no matter how hard you try, you can't hide from the truth." Melania's face turned a shade paler, but she refused to back down. "This is nonsense," she said, her voice now trembling slightly. "I've done nothing wrong. I am Baron's mother. I've been there for him. And that's all that matters." Jasmine shook her head, the frustration in her eyes becoming more apparent. "You don't get it, do you? It's not about whether you're Baron's mother, it's about the truth you're hiding. It's about the way you've manipulated the narrative, time and time again, to avoid the real questions. And now you're trapped." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, each one landing with a thud that seemed to resonate deep within the studio. It was clear now, Melania's defense had crumbled. The perfect image she had so carefully curated was no longer enough to shield her from the truth. Jasmine's accusations had gone beyond simple politics, they had cut into the very heart of Melania's public life. The host, sensing that the conversation was veering dangerously close to a point of no return, attempted once again to steer things back. "Let's refocus," he said, trying to salvage what remained of the conversation. "We're here to discuss the future of America." But Jasmine wasn't finished. "The future of America," she said, scoffing slightly. "How can we talk about the future when the past is still haunting us? When people like Melania Trump are still trying to control the narrative, hiding behind lies and deception?" The room was silent for a moment, and Melania's face had lost its usual composure. It was no longer about defending her motherhood or her role as First Lady, it was about a much bigger question. How long could Melania continue to hide the truth? How long could she keep pretending that everything was fine, while the walls around her began to collapse? Jasmine had exposed something far more dangerous than a simple political disagreement. She had peeled back the curtain on Melania's carefully constructed life, revealing the cracks and the lies that had once been hidden. And in that moment, Melania Trump's defense had crumbled. The silence in the room was deafening as Jasmine Crockett's words hung in the air, like a heavy weight that no one dared to move. The studio lights, once bright and cheery, now seemed to cast long shadows on Melania Trump, exposing the cracks that had begun to show in her perfect, polished image. The tension was palpable. Jasmine had just dropped the bombshell, accusing Melania not just of hiding behind a manufactured public persona, but of actively concealing the truth about her life and the Trump family. The accusation was far-reaching, and in that moment, it felt as though Melania's world was starting to crumble. What had been a relatively calm conversation about America's future had transformed into something much darker, a confrontation that went beyond politics and touched on the deepest, most uncomfortable truths of the First Lady's private life. Melania, who had spent years crafting a flawless image of grace and elegance, was now trapped in a corner. Her eyes flickered for a moment, betraying the calm she had so carefully curated. She had tried to dismiss Jasmine's accusations, denied them, turned them into absurdities, but Jasmine wasn't letting go. Every word she spoke chipped away at Melania's defense, until it felt as though nothing was left to hold on to. The host, sensing that the situation was spiraling beyond repair, quickly interjected, trying once again to shift the focus back to the issues at hand. "Let's not get too far off track," he said, his voice faltering as he glanced nervously at the two women. "We're here to talk about the future of the country, not personal matters." But Jasmine wasn't having it. She wasn't about to let Melania off the hook. She had been watching for years as Melania kept a distance from the controversies surrounding her husband, Donald Trump, choosing instead to maintain her role as the silent, supportive wife. Jasmine knew better than to buy into that image. She had seen it time and again, the way powerful people tried to manipulate the truth to fit their narratives. And now, she wasn't going to let Melania do it any longer. No, Jasmine responded, her voice sharp and unwavering. We're talking about the truth, the one you've been running from. You've hidden behind your perfect image for too long, pretending like you're not part of the story. But you are, Melania. You're part of all of this. And you can't just keep pretending like you're not. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. The audience, once unsure of what was really happening, now understood the gravity of the situation. The exchange between the two women had become something more than a heated political debate. It was an unmasking of a facade that had been carefully constructed for years. Jasmine continued, her words cutting through the silence. People like you, Melania, they think they can control the narrative. They think they can spin the truth however they want. But the truth doesn't work that way. It comes out eventually. And when it does, it'll bring down everything you've tried to hide. Melania's face had gone pale. Her lips pressed together in a thin, tight line, but still, she said nothing. She had always been a woman of few words, but this was different. This wasn't just a matter of keeping up appearances, it was a battle for her legacy, for the image she had worked so tirelessly to create. And Jasmine was tearing it down, piece by piece. The tension in the studio was electric. Jasmine's accusations had thrown Melania into a defensive crouch, but it was clear that the walls around her were closing in. The more she tried to dismiss Jasmine, the more the truth seemed to linger, stubbornly, just out of reach. You can't keep hiding, Melania, Jasmine pressed. This isn't about just you and Baron. This is about everything you've done to cover up the real story. The way you've manipulated the public, the way you've stayed silent when your husband's actions demanded your voice. You're not just his wife, Melania. You're complicit. And people are starting to see that. Melania's breathing quickened, but she still held herself together. For a moment, it seemed as if she might stand up and leave, walk off the set, and end the conversation there. But something stopped her. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the realization that, for once, she couldn't control the narrative. This wasn't a situation where she could simply smile and nod her way out of trouble. Jasmine's words had landed with force, and they were having an impact. The audience had fallen completely silent, hanging on every word. No one had expected this kind of confrontation, but now that it was unfolding, it was clear that there was no turning back. The stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. What had begun as a friendly conversation had become a battlefield, with Jasmine fighting for truth and transparency, and Melania struggling to maintain the carefully constructed world she had worked so hard to protect. You think you can get away with pretending like nothing happened, Jasmine continued, her tone unrelenting. But the truth is, people are done with the lies. They're done with the games. You've been trying to manipulate the public for years, Melania. And the truth? It's not something you can hide anymore. The host, trying once again to regain control, attempted to steer the conversation back to more neutral ground. We've covered a lot of ground here, he said, his voice tinged with desperation. Perhaps we should take a moment to discuss the broader issues facing America. But Jasmine was on a roll, and she wasn't stopping now. No, this is the issue. This is what America needs to see. The truth about who these people really are. Not the polished, media-friendly version. Not the facade they put on for the cameras. The real story, the one they've been hiding, is what matters. The room fell silent again, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Jasmine wasn't just talking about Melania anymore. She was speaking to the entire system of power and manipulation that had allowed people like Melania to thrive by hiding the truth. She was speaking to a larger narrative, one that the audience couldn't ignore. Melania's face had gone pale, and it was clear that the weight of the conversation had taken its toll. For the first time all evening, she seemed vulnerable. The woman who had once seemed untouchable, unflappable, was now exposed in a way that she couldn't have anticipated. The facade was gone, and the real Melania Trump was standing there for all to see, trapped in a web of her own making. Jasmine's words had struck their mark, and as the camera panned across the room, it was clear that the conversation had reached a turning point. The truth, no matter how much Melania tried to avoid it, was finally coming to light. And with it, the world was beginning to see just how fragile her defense had become. The conversation, once about America's future, had become about something far more personal, about the lies people tell to protect their image, and about the inevitable moment when the truth can no longer be ignored. Melania's downfall had begun, and there was no turning back.